It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. In 2001, Detroit opened its polls with a big question on the ballot. 21 people were running for mayor. Dennis Archer was stepping aside after 2 terms, and Detroit was about to pick somebody new. But that wasn't the focus for long, because the day was Tuesday, September 11th. And that morning, the Twin Towers came down in New York City. Every newsroom in America turned east.
Good morning. You're listening to special coverage of tragic events that have occurred today in New York City and in Washington, D.C. I'm going to go through just a timeline of today's events as compiled by the Associated Press. Plane crashes into Tower of World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan shortly before 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Then shortly after 9 a.m. Eastern Time, a second plane crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center.
That was NPR's Bob Edwards. WDET had to turn east and carry that coverage and stay home at the same time. It had to cover the deadliest attack in the country's history and cover a city that was still, that same afternoon, quietly choosing who would lead it. Jerome Vaughn helped run that coverage. It won an award, though the award isn't the part he remembers. What he remembers is that the voting didn't stop. That was the story underneath the story. Democracy goes on. He'd been here since 1992 when he walked into this building as an intern and, apart from 1 year away, never left. He's run the WDET newsroom for nearly 20 years. Rosa Parks, Aretha Franklin, Kwame Kilpatrick, a bankruptcy, and a city working to rebuild. Through it all, he was in the room, or he led someone who was. Today is his last day at WDET. Jerome Vaughn, welcome.
Thank you so much.
You've said that you knew you wanted to do radio journalism back when you were 5 years old. How do you know?
So my mom bought me a Panasonic ball and chain radio, bright yellow, and the two loves of my life, other than my wife, came out of that radio, Beatles, but also the greats of radio journalism. I mean, Charles Collingwood and Walter Cronkite and Eric Sevareid were doing broadcast journalism, were telling the world about what was going on. And something caught me just about them painting pictures with their words. I could see what they were describing just purely from their words. And that caught me very early on at 5. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to paint pictures with my words. And there was something very, in my mind, very artistic about doing it. Now, I have a better understanding of that now than I did, when I was 5, 6, 7. But right away, I knew this is it.
At that young of an age, to be so captivated by radio news. So it wasn't just that this was stirring your imagination for the way that you can create pictures with words, but it sounds to me like it was also engaging your mind when it comes to a bigger world and the different events, the different things transpiring in a world outside of your young little body.
Yeah. I mean, obviously at that age, there are a lot of things I didn't understand. But the radio was a constant companion. So I'm playing with my Hot Wheels I'm drawing with crayons, and I have the radio on, and I'm listening to what's going on around the world. And the one thing I have a glimpse of still in my head from that time is Vietnam. Now, not bloodshed or gore or politics, because I didn't understand any of that then, but the idea of pictures of the jungle. And I still have some of those pictures in my head from back then in their descriptions. And so I knew that was not what Detroit was like. I knew that was not what Missouri was like, where, my grandparents lived. It told me that there was somewhere else and that there was somewhere different. And I could picture that and imagine that from the radio.
I want to speed things up to your time at WDET, which began in the 1900s, as the kids like to say.
Well, back in my day.
1992, to be exact. I'm wondering, what was WDET like at that time?
It was funny enough, it was a lot like it is now, in the sense of you had people who were committed to Detroit, people who were committed to public radio, people who were committed to the news and telling Detroiters what was important, people who were committed to diversity, people who were committed to all sorts of music and working together. And it was really a brewing pot, a melting pot of these great folks. And they were phenomenal at doing what they did. I mean, Karen Mathis was the general manager, and she was inspirational for me, and also, made a point of making sure I could see what was going on. I think of, musicians like, Robert Jones, who had a show and, still is performing and loved Detroit, or the development director, Marguerite Carlton, who, worked her butt off to make sure the station had money to do what it was doing. I think the station was a little more hippie in those days. The direct routes to the 70s, there was more of a direct connection then than there is now. Obviously, a lot of time has passed. I think the station has gotten to be, more businesslike in a lot of ways, but the dedication to Detroit, hasn't changed, and the feeling you can experiment and try something new, that hasn't changed either.
You mentioned Marguerite Carlton, the development director at that time. I realize your first paid work here wasn't in news at all. I mean, you came in as an intern in January, and by April, you were doing development work. You were helping raise money. It was November before somebody moved you into the newsroom as a producer. And that somebody was Don Gagne, who set down his own microphone at NPR a few months ago after 4 decades.
A job opening arose. Jerome had been working in the development office at the station, and he'd been doing a lot of volunteering and interning in the news department. When that opening came up, it was Jerome's job. There was never any contest. That was one of the best things I did in my career in public radio, was to get you on staff, which has led to all the great things that we all know about now.
So Don Gagne opened the door for you into WDET's newsroom. But you didn't stay. You left for Michigan Public, and after 1 year, you came back. Why?
Wow, how much time do we have? I'll give you the not too long version. So, wow, this is difficult to edit. So I left for some greener pastures in August of 2006. And if you want more details, come and talk to me in person. But went to, then it was Michigan Radio, became news director there, their first black news director. And then things changed here dramatically after I left. And not because I left, but the news director at the time, Joan Sylvie, she left because things weren't right for her. And then right after Christmas break of that year, so that would have been January of 07, I got a call from a reporter who was here, Celeste Headley, and she just said to me, "He's gone." And it's like, what's going on? So the general manager at the time packed up his whole office over Christmas break and left and didn't tell anybody. And needless to say, when your leader leaves without word that he's leaving, things get shaky. And the program director at the time, Alan Mazurek, called me after, it wasn't right away, but after a little while when the group here was figuring out what was going on, called me and said, would you like to come back and help us rebuild? And before he got the word re out of his mouth, I was like, yes, I'm back, because this is home, right? And the folks at Michigan Public were great. They had an understanding, because I said, I've got to go back and rebuild my hometown public radio station. And every one of them had an understanding of that, and they weren't ticked off at me about it. And they wished me luck. And, we've stayed in touch over the last, 20 years of that. So, yeah, this is where I had to be. I mean, I'm Detroit through and through.
So it was a calling to work at your hometown station.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, Detroit is the most important place on the face of the earth for me. It's my favorite place on the face of the earth. And, this is where I want people to know what's going on. I want them to know what's going on so this can be a better place, so that this can be a place that the rest of the world knows how great it is. And, there were times in previous decades when, people thought this was an awful place. And I always was like, hey, you wouldn't have hundreds of thousands of people living here if it was that bad. And that was my thing to say, hey, you're wrong.
So part of that mission stemmed from the fact that much of the national media was getting our city wrong. And you felt like you had this opportunity to provide the nuance, the texture, the narratives, the stories that could tell there was so much more happening in Detroit.
So let me tell you that story. So this was after college. A friend of mine and we went out to San Francisco, and I lived out there for 3 years. I came back for Thanksgiving in 1990, and I saw a story, I think it was on Primetime Live, and it was just horrible. They were saying, everybody has a gun. And I remember there was this guy who brought like 12 guns out and set them on his porch. Well, come to find out later, all those guns were broken, and it was just kind of a setup for this story. But I was like, somebody's got to tell the truth about Detroit. I think, I grew up here. I never got shot. I never got robbed. I never robbed anyone. So, let's talk about the realities of Detroit. And so I came back the next year to start the journey to get here, where I could, tell the truth about this city.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent with Jerome Vaughn. Detroit born, Detroit raised. He came to WDET in 1992 as an intern and worked many jobs in this building on his way up. Underwriter, producer, reporter, editor. He's run the WDET newsroom for nearly 20 years. This afternoon, he anchors All Things Considered Detroit 3 to 7, and it's his last time. I want to think about some of the stories you worked on here. Back in 2015, you won an award for covering the 50th anniversary of the Palm Sunday tornadoes that hit the Midwest. In 12 hours, 47 tornadoes descended on the region, leaving hundreds dead, thousands injured. You, alongside Pat Batchelor and Quinn Kleinfelter, won an award from the Society of Professional Journalists for this work. Why did you want to memorialize this event?
Wow. A couple of reasons. Weather is another thing that's always been important to me. I've been interested in tornadoes and hurricanes and things also since, I was pretty young. I think that's something I have in common with Pat Batchelor. And this huge event happened that changed weather history in a lot of ways. And I thought, here's an opportunity to tell this story that a lot of people may not know about because, it happened, whatever it was at the time, 40 years ago. And I thought, this is something that's made a difference for Detroiters. It's made a difference for the whole country, that, the Palm Sunday tornadoes made a change in how the Weather Service worked and, created this idea of tornado watches and tornado warnings, which was much murkier before those storms came across. And so it was an important story to tell. And it was one that, I had a lot of personal interest in.
Early in the piece, you played part of a documentary about Palm Sunday called Death Out of Darkness. Here's you setting that up.
The month of March had been remarkably cold, and throughout southeast Michigan, residents were getting outside to take advantage of the day's warm weather. A 1966 documentary on the Palm Sunday outbreak called Death Out of Darkness sets the scene.
The date, April 11, Palm Sunday. At the U.S. Weather Bureau in Indianapolis, radar observers were keeping anxious watch on storm cells bearing down on the central Midwest. During the preceding hours, a warm, moist front had been rolling northeastward from the Gulf states. Its path would soon collide with a fast-moving cold front coming from the west.
That's some of the texture that I think really has defined a lot of your work, Jerome. It's other people's sounds from documentaries, from archives, from tape that nobody's heard in half a century. Is that what you fell in love with?
Part of it, yeah. I mean, people saying this is what happened in that case in 1966 in a very contemporary way, right? That was, fresh in 1966. And so many things kind of drop out of our memories, our collective memories, very quickly. I think probably even more so now because the pace of news is so fast. And so to be able to go back and see something or hear something from long ago for an event that is important, that's something that sticks with me. And I think that's something that's, been a thread for me throughout my time here. One of the things that I covered here was, and it's very clear in my mind still, is the tornado that hit Detroit Highland Park in 1997. And so there is a thread that sort of runs through a number of the things that I've worked on.
And it's about you piecing together the bigger impacts, the bigger significance, helping listeners to draw some conclusions. I want to think about another story that I think speaks to this mission of yours. You did a piece looking at the 1967 rebellion through the eyes of journalists. Here you are in 2017.
No one in Detroit knew in late July 1967 that the city was just a few days away from an event that would make history. School was out, teenagers were listening to rock and roll on WKNR and R&B on WCHB. Around town, television reporters were covering stories like the marital problems of Mayor Jerry Kavanaugh and the Tigers' efforts to win their first pennant in decades. Detroiters had watched national news coverage of the riots in Newark earlier in the month, but the common refrain in town was that the same thing couldn't happen here. Eric Smith says he'll never forget first hearing about the disturbance at 12th and Claremont. He was the assistant news director at WKNR Radio at the time.
I remember it distinctly. Well, you can't not remember it. It's one of those days that, much like the Kennedy assassination, you remember that moment in time. And it was July 23rd. My wife and I had gotten up early that morning because we had plans to go out to Kensington Park with some friends for a picnic. And we were assembling our picnic basket and the sandwiches and the stuff we were going to take out to the park. And I got a telephone call from one of the guys at the radio station. He said, something's going on down on 12th Street. He said, nobody will talk. He said, but they're sending in, he said, the tactical mobile units. And he said, I think they're sending fire trucks somewhere. He said, but nobody will confirm anything for me.
The 1967 rebellion here in Detroit, that moment completely reshaped the city. I'm wondering, how did it reshape your life and your journalism?
Well, I have no memories, personal memories of it, although my mom did tell me that she and my uncle or brother, we were at a park, and they started seeing tanks roll down the street, and they, snatched me up, and we ran home because of that. I mean, this is kind of the crucial point in Detroit history. This is what things really hinged on, at least, for the end of the, 20th century. And it changed the direction of Detroit. It changed the direction of the suburbs. It changed national policy. And this was something that you couldn't just ignore. You couldn't look past. And me being someone who obviously is really interested in history, this was a piece that I wanted to do. Folks who covered it were still around. That was Eric Smith, who used to work at Channel 7 and before that at WKNR. And so I interviewed him and a number of other people about their experiences then. And it gave me a chance to put together this piece to say to people now, much later, this is what it was like. You may have heard this was going on, but you probably don't know how big of a deal it was at the time for the people who lived it. And to be able to sort of bring some of that back and say, remember this, don't forget this, this is important, you need to know about this. I think that was important to tell.
So to get listeners to the closest version of the truth about the 1967 rebellion that you could, you went to the people who were on the ground covering it.
Yeah, and they told their stories. I mean, that's it. I mean, they told their stories about their experiences, and a lot of those stories were not stories that necessarily got put on the air or saved in a recording. Those stories are etched in their minds, and you need to get those stories out so that it doesn't show up in the paper, but this is important to know as well. So it's the idea of oral storytelling, right? Before there was print, before there was television, before there was radio, people were telling stories and passing those stories down. I mean, we shouldn't forget about that.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent with Jerome Vaughn. Detroit-born, Detroit-raised, he came to WDET in 1992 as an intern and worked many jobs in this building on his way up and other buildings. Underwriter, producer, reporter, editor. He's run the WDET newsroom since 2007. In that time, he's covered Rosa Parks' funeral for NPR and Aretha Franklin's. He's covered a mayor's rise and fall in a city going bankrupt and coming back. He built the Detroit Evening Report so that Detroiters of color would hear their own city in their own voices. Michigan's Journalism Hall of Fame took him in 2018. This afternoon, he anchors All Things Considered Detroit 3 to 7. It's the last time. Coming up, the fight he picked inside this building and what it cost him. Stay with us. It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent, and I'm speaking with Jerome Vaughn. He's led the newsroom at this station for nearly 20 years. Today, after he hosts All Things Considered, he'll be signing off. Jerome, before the break, you were talking about the 1967 rebellion. But you weren't really talking about 1967. You were talking about who's standing there when a city's story gets written and who gets left out of it. I realize that for you, that's been a hiring practice. You've said the internship program here has been a personal mission. You've also said you spent political capital on it, that there were people in this building who thought interns were a waste of everybody's time. Many of those interns never left journalism. Here are three who wanted to say something to you.
I, like so many other people, would not have a career in broadcast journalism without Jerome Vaughn. I knew that I wanted to tell stories, but I didn't know that I'd fall in love with this particular medium, this particular format. I went to school for television, so to be in radio in this capacity has been mind-boggling to me, but I owe that to Jerome Vaughn.
What makes him such a good mentor is his ability to relate to and understand people. And the other thing is I frankly wouldn't be the person that I am without Jerome Vaughn, because so much of who I am now and how I see the world has been shaped by the experiences I've had as a journalist. But yeah, I wouldn't be a journalist without Jerome Vaughn, and I wouldn't be the person that I am without being a journalist. So I owe a lot to Jerome.
I remember when I came in as an intern, Jerome told me that if he found a comma in any of my cut and copy scripts, he would fine me $1, and I'd have to put that in a jar. And to this day, I never put commas in my cut and copy scripts. In fact, if I'm training a new young journalist about how to write for the ear, they don't use commas either. And that's thanks to JV. I tell them, make sure your host knows where they can take a breath. And it's worked ever since.
WDET's Tia Graham and Alex McLennan, two vital members of the Metro team, and Jake Neer. He runs audio at Automotive News. 3 interns, years apart, and like many you've mentored, they're all still doing this for a living. That's the part that's easy to celebrate. I want the part that wasn't. You said you spent political capital on supporting and fighting for interns. And political capital means somebody was on the other side of it. Did anyone fight you on this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I won't name names. But, you know, there were people who thought it was a waste of time to spend, you know, working with kids. You know, why waste time with them? You could be doing this or that or the other. And my thought was always, you know, I got to whatever point I was at because someone helped me get there, right? I was an intern, and thanks to Don Gagne and Phil Danieri and Nkenga Zola, they helped me move up and get more skills. And I thought I need to do that. And I met other people around the country. I'm going to drop one more name, Doug Mitchell, who started Next Generation Radio Project for NPR, who believed the same thing. And so to be able to say, no, all right, if I'm getting paid for, 7.5 hours a day, I'm going to put in another hour and a half, couple hours a day to help these young people get up and learn the craft and move forward. And it has been a personal mission of mine to make sure that they're going to be good public radio journalists. As I always said, sort of jokingly, but, when I'm retired at, 92 years old, I want to make sure that there's good public radio for me to listen to while I'm in my rocking chair. And so that was a lot of it.
Okay, so it was a selfish mission then.
Oh, yeah. It was selfish. But, I mean, there's just something special about being able to find something that you love and do it. And I had the chance to do that, and I wanted to make sure that others did too.
I want to go back to some of the other notable coverage, some of the unforgettable moments that you've been part of during your time with WDET. I'm thinking about Aretha Franklin's funeral in 2018. It began at 10 in the morning on August 31st and ran until nearly 7 at night. You did special coverage with WDIV TV as part of a simulcast. There was also reporting from Quinn Kleinfelter, Eli Newman, and Amanda LeClaire. L.J. Reynolds of The Dramatics was a close friend of Aretha Franklin. Amanda spoke with him.
If you have to be trained to sing, you'll never get where Aretha is at, or even me. Because singing at that level, it takes, first of all, compassion, sincerity. You have to be born with a gift. She was born to become Aretha Franklin.
And here's reporter Eli Newman speaking with Terry Tarrant about Franklin.
She stayed with us, just like Graceland have the king of rock, Elvis Presley. The queen of soul stays here. No one gets that.
Jerome, in your eyes, what does Aretha Franklin, her music, and her family mean to Detroiters?
Wow. The phrase is the queen of soul, but really for Detroiters, she was the queen of Detroit. She lived a life. She told stories through her music that Detroiters understood, viscerally understood, and there were people who loved her dearly and rooted for her throughout her career. As she started out singing in church, and then as she was singing in these huge venues or at the Super Bowl, all of these things, Detroiters got to live their life just a little bit vicariously through the Queen. One of the moments that I remember, and some other folks who've been here a long time remember, is a time when she was on Fresh Air, and she came in the studio here to do an interview with Terry Gross, and it was just, I think everyone was awestruck that she was in this building.
Jerome, a 9-hour funeral is not a one-person job. This makes me think about how you often bring other folks into the fold to cover stories more completely. And many of the same people have been standing next to you for a very long time. Pat Batchelor, Quinn Kleinfelter, Sasha Ryan, all three have spent years in a newsroom you ran.
We were literally born 3 days apart. I was August 23rd. He was August 26th. So that makes me slightly older, as you can tell by the gray hair. We do have a lot in common. We both like Star Trek. We're both big fans of the old Batman TV series starring Adam West and Burt Ward. Sometimes we even call each other old chum. I guess you could call it a cosmic connection. If we didn't have different sets of parents, we'd probably be brothers. And that's how I think of him.
He taught me how to radio. And he taught me that you can always do something differently. You can always push the boundaries. But whatever you do, it still has to be good journalism. It has to be good storytelling. It has to be good production. Jerome really shaped the culture of the WDET newsroom into a place where people respect each other, have faith in each other, and respect the work.
Jerome was covering a story by a car dealership when a TV reporter who was also there launched into a sales pitch. Come on down and get some great deals. When Jerome protested that was not real reporting, real journalism, he says the TV reporter told him, quote, "It's not always about the journalism." That so incensed Jerome that he not only retells that story, but he uses it as an example of what not to do for the many, many interns whose careers he's helped shape over the years.
WDET's Pat Batchelor, Sasha Ryan, Quinn Kleinfelter, between them, a big chunk of the history of this newsroom. And I guess that's the thing about running one. You make the call and other people carry it. What was one of the harder calls you had to make?
Wow, that's a good question. I would say I had to fire one reporter, and I had to convince another one to leave. And those were the hardest things for me to do, because you've got to make sure that things are moving forward and moving on in the same direction. And sometimes there's some discord, but most of the time, thankfully, I've been able to do that with folks.
Were those some of the hardest things you had to do? Because part of your mission has really been to work with people to see what you think their potential is and try to bring that out of them to help them to reach that next step.
Partially. I think I want to see people succeed. I want to see people get to where they're going. I think often, I don't want to say often, but sometimes in those cases, folks wanted to do things that weren't consistent with what we do here. And I don't wish any of them any ill will, and one of them is still a close friend of mine. But you want to make sure that people can get where they want to go, and sometimes that's not within this, the four walls here at this place. I think just a little short story about interns, and I had an intern who was she had previously worked in the marketing department, and she wanted to do a news internship. And I said, sure, come on. And after about 2 weeks, I walked in the newsroom, and she's crying in the newsroom. And I'm like, what's going on? Talk to me about, well, she just couldn't handle the deadlines. And it was hard for her. And, we talked about it, and she wound up going back into marketing. So, this job, this profession isn't for everyone. And I want to make sure people get to where they're going.
Work dad is what Tia Graham called you. Hey, there have been more than a few deadlines that have made me cry. So I can understand that. I want to think about the bigger picture, something else that I know you want to see survive, in addition to the people who have worked in the WDET newsroom, and that is public radio itself. I mean, it's been in crisis mode since it lost federal money this year. Congress took back $1.1 billion last July. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting voted itself out of existence in January. That was after 58 years. Since then, many stations have closed or they've cut their staff. But public radio has a big problem. It still isn't speaking to enough voters, enough listeners who are young and diverse. What must it do to survive? And many of them are voters, I should say, actually.
Well, I think public radio has to meet listeners and potential listeners where they are. I mean, across the country, public radio listeners are older, they tend to be white, and they tend to be affluent. That's not sort of the makeup of the country as a whole, right? And the idea of public radio is that you represent everyone, or you can touch base and relate to just about everyone. And I think the industry has a lot of work to get that done. I won't even talk about, sort of the technical and technological transformations that have to happen to keep things going. But, there are smart people here and in other public radio stations across the country. They're working on that. I think they'll do that. But, one of the key things is, I think, really finding a way to talk to diverse audiences, right? Not just preach to the choir, not just cater to the people who are already listening, but to have outreach, to find new listeners and say, hey, there's something here that you might enjoy or something that might serve you well. Give us a try. I think you and Tia do a really good job of that in who you invite onto the Metro to talk about these important issues and not just talk to leaders who are already in power.
WDET's longtime news director and Michigan Journalism Hall of Famer, Jerome Vaughn. Today he retires from the WDET airwaves. Jerome, thank you so much for everything.
You are welcome, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's next.